Hi everyone. Welcome to the Somatic EMDR Therapy. My name is Oyemi Kalimaat, and we're going to be spending a lot of time together because I'm going to be hosting a couple of these sessions with you guys. And like Scott said, this is session one, week one, class one, orientation to EMDR and somatics, focusing on somatic nervous system techniques and dialogues. Dr. Scott Lyons, Carrie Powers, Ariel Schwartz, and Craig Penner will put their bios in the chat just in case if you already don't know who they are. So please take your time and kind of familiarize yourself with who the faculty is. And I'm just going to do a little bit of a land acknowledgement here before we start and introduce the team to you guys. As our community gathers today from various corners of the globe, we would like to acknowledge that the land which we live and work on is the traditional territory of many indigenous peoples. We respectfully honor their people, cultures, and traditions. And there's four presenters with many content to get through, and I know you guys are super eager. So I'm gonna stop right here. And as we move on through the session, if you are having any technical challenges or difficulties or anything, we are here to support you. Please feel free to reach out to us directly via chat. Okay? Enjoy, everyone. Thank you.
So yummy. All right. So, my friends, we're going to start with a brief practice. And I'm just going to say, I love how everyone was sharing where they're from and already finding friends in similar time zones and locations. And I'm going to encourage you to keep doing that in the online forum as well, so you can get to meet people in your time zones to watch the videos again or do practice sessions with later on. So with that said, we're going to do a starting practice. I'm going to invite you to find a comfortable position. That might be seated, that might be lying down, that might be standing up. So really from where your energy is and your need right now, find the position that feels best to begin. A position that eventually would allow you to turn inwards. And I noticed some people already closed their eyes, and you're welcome to. And before we get too internal, I'm going to invite us to begin to do a little body mapping. So you can start anywhere along your body that's accessible to you. And it's just as though you're going to map the topography of your skin with your hands, if that's available. If it's not available to you, then you can imagine the mapping of your container, your skin. You might even imagine kind of painting the container in. As you move along, if that's available for you, to use your hands or something else like pillows or a wall to give a little squeeze, a little compression as you map out the three-dimensional shape of your whole body. In any practice, it feels like you need to pause. You have all the agency in the world. If you haven't moved down to your pelvis and legs, if that's available, I'll invite you to do that as well. And then after you've mapped your body, the three-dimensional shape of your body, I invite you to do a global hug, kind of a hug of your whole body. We might call that a compression. You can wrap your hands around, you can just condense the shape inward towards the core, and then a release, letting the expansion of your body, of that three-dimensional shape. And perhaps notice if there's some more awareness of the shape or container of your body. And then from your focus on the container or the shape of your body, gently moving inward into the contents, into the filling. of your body. You might do that with simply shifting your attention or even a gentle movement of the fluids of the organs of your body. As your attention and your focus, perhaps your movement, connects with the contents of your body. I'll invite you to drop the question, how am I? To drop the question like a pebble into a pond. Dropping that question into your body, how am I? And letting any response emerge. How am I right now? Listening and tuning in, even if it's no response. And whatever the response is, even if it's silence, just taking some moments to acknowledge, to validate, to reflect back into yourself how it is you are in this moment. As you take this time to connect in and to acknowledge, perhaps just noticing just how much more present you might be in this moment, how much more here you are now, and how much more of you is here now. And from all of that here-ness, or even if it's just a little more presence, beginning to attune outwards into the sounds of your space, into the smells of your space. Shifting your focus outward once again. You might invite some movement if that's helpful. And eventually, if it's available for you, to allow your eyelids to open and taking in whatever colors or shapes are in your space. Thank you for your beautiful presence in our arrival practice. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Carrie to begin our first question. What is EMDR? I'll pass it to you, Carrie.
This is kind of be nuts and bolts of what is EMDR and what is the intention of EMDR. So I thought we'd first start with dispelling some myths. It's very interesting when, I've been practicing EMDR for, 12 years. And when people come in asking for EMDR, they have very little information about what it actually is. And sometimes there's some themes that come up around it, some misconceptions. So I thought I'd go over those first because I think making sure that we know exactly what we're working with. Okay, and then we'll go over what is, how is EMDR born, and then the intentions, and then seeing EMDR as parts work for the brain. All right, so what is EMDR? So EMDR is it's not a magic wand. Sometimes people come in and they believe that EMDR will cure absolutely everything. And I think that there is a lot of research that says it can help quite a bit with things that get stuck in our system in the emotional memory. And there are also limitations in terms of organic disorders. So we want to make sure that we're not communicating to others that it is a cure-all for anything that ails us. Um, so it's not a rigid step-by-step protocol. Even before adding the somatic element, Francine Shapiro, who's the founder, she wanted to make sure that it was very integrative and that we were working with the person more than the script of EMDR. It's something that can flow, and we can go forwards and we can go backwards and we can go out of it and come back in. So there's a lot of movement that can happen that may not look like the exact protocol as we're going to teach it, so that you can kind of let go of it. Another thing that comes up is people believe that EMDR, the standard protocol, is pretty quick, like do a couple sessions and you're good to go. And I think it's a very rare experience that a person who is experiencing pretty intense trauma or intense symptoms will just move through it in a couple sessions. To see it as a process can be really important. And I understand a lot of people have already taken the EMDR, so this is kind of a refresher for people, but just kind of setting people's expectations at a level that is really important for the model. Also, sometimes people think it's easy or simple. It is complex. It can be complex because we're really trying to be attentive to what is happening for the client, attentive to ourselves, and move with the direction that the client needs to move with, being aware of the nervous system. So there are things that we're attending to at the same time. So some people do believe, they come in thinking that EMDR is going to erase memories and it's going to get rid of the memories that they have of trauma. And it does not, it can make memories less vivid, but in general, I would say that it is not going to get rid of the memory, more the emotional charge when we've come to a resolution with the trauma. Another thing that people say is that it is a memory retrieval tool. So some people might say, I want to remember exactly what happened in my trauma or my experience. And so EMDR can enhance memory, but it's not, it's working with the brain's own healing system. And so if the brain says, we're not ready for that, it's still probably going to be hard to retrieve. So at the same time, when people do trauma work or they work with an experience that they're trying to move through, they do feel like other memories that weren't accessible before surrounding that memory may come up. So they might remember a positive memory that happened 2 hours before the trauma, where they for years for completely that was out of their memory, conscious memory. So that does happen, and at the same time, I do hear this a lot. People do believe that EMDR is like hypnosis. So just to make sure we're clear, it's not hypnosis. We're not going into any kind of state where it is, there's no vulnerability in the state itself. It's actually trying to wake up different parts of the brain so that those parts of the brain can talk to each other a little bit more effectively. All right. So let's talk about what EMDR is. So EMDR is highly researched. There are so many studies out there about EMDR. There's some studies that are maybe a little biased, of course, but there's some really good resources out there to, just track the effectiveness of EMDR. EMDR is integrative. The founder of EMDR wanted to make sure that it could be part of, other things that people work with. So, some people add CBT, DBT. We are adding somatic work, as especially here. But it's meant to kind of not just stand alone, but also making sure like there are other supports, other ways to prepare for moving through these memories or going through the whole process. EMDR is phase-based, so there are 8 phases to EMDR, but the phases they can be kind of fluid. So you can go from phase 2 preparation to phase 3 and phase 4, and then go back to phase 2. And that's okay. If that's what is needed with a client, that's what you can do. It is bottom up, but it leans a little bit more towards top down. And when I say bottom up, I mean that it is addressing and processing what's happening in the body and the sensations. And then top down, we're addressing what's happening in the thoughts and the mind. It leans a little bit more towards, I think, top down, but both are part of it. And then, of course, we have bilateral stimulation that we're going to be using, and we're going to be finding lots of different ways to use that with our somatic work. But also in EMDR, we have auditory bilateral stimulation where you hear a sound that goes in one ear and then another ear and one ear and another ear. And then we'll also have eye movements. So seeing, moving eyes back and forth. And then, we can do tapping. So butterfly hug, we're going to learn about that later. And all of that is in the interest of moving these memories from an emotional place to a more fact-based place. All right. So Francine Shapiro, in the beginning of EMDR, she actually happened upon this. It wasn't something that, she studied in a laboratory. She actually was walking in a park, and this was right around the time that she was discovering, what she wanted to do for her dissertation. And she noticed that she was struggling with some things internally. And as she was walking, those things started to feel better. And she was like, why is that? So she started to track what was happening in that moment as she was walking, and things started to feel better. And she noticed that she was doing bilateral movements with her eyes. I think they were diagonal. And as she did that, her eyes were kind of darting as she was thinking about these things. And as she did that, she started to notice, oh, that actually feels better. So she started to test it out. She tried it with friends, family, and started to notice a pattern with it. And then eventually she started to do research, and her research focused mainly in the beginning on single incident trauma, so PTSD. And that's where she kind of gained some momentum on how, developing this protocol. So the quote from Francine Shapiro is, the goal of EMDR treatment is to rapidly metabolize dysfunctional residue from the past and transform it into something useful. Yeah, so this is not when we're working on a traumatic experience or an overwhelming experience, the pain of it does not just go to some other place or get put away. Eventually it kind of just doesn't, it's just not there anymore. So we're going to talk about that in terms of parts work. So I'm not sure how many people have taken parts work, but this is based on Dolores Mascara's work in progressive, the progressive approach with EMDR. So actually, this is her parts work, but I saw some kind of similarities between her parts work and some of the things we do with EMDR. So one of the things that happens when there's an overwhelming experience is that a part of us gets isolated from the rest of us. There's an emotional part that seems to hold the traumatic memory, and then there's an apparently normal part that begins to kind of just try to go along with things as usual and tries to avoid the emotional part because it's too much, it's too overwhelming. Right. And so this is something that also we can track in the brain. There's a part of our brain, the amygdala, that just carries all of the emotional baggage of the trauma as if it's happening right now. And so they're on kind of an emergency flashing light kind of level of intensity. And then we also have other parts of the brain, especially when we're in a trauma, that start to go kind of dim. With people who've experienced complex trauma, the amygdala is in overfunctioning so that it is really constantly looking out for danger and is feeling really connected to the past emotional memory of the trauma. So these parts aren't talking to each other. So what we're doing with EMDR and what we do with parts work is we're helping, first of all, the most now part of us, the most adult part of us, developing a sense of like here-ness, a now self, from that kind of one that is trying to just get on with things. And we start that by building up resources internally. And when we do that, we're using the bilateral stimulation, and we usually do it slow. And as we use the bilateral, it will reduce that sympathetic response. It'll kind of calm down what's happening in the amygdala, so it makes it easier to self-reflect. And we're trying to build that ability so to just be in the present, in the okayness. So when we're also doing EMDR and the bilateral stimulation, it can overwhelm our working memory so that the part of us that wants to be on automatic is taken with that task. And then there's slow processing that can happen, very conscious, deliberate processing that can happen. So another thing we do in parts work is we help that now part kind of differentiate from the past and unblend. And so in EMDR, we do something similar where we kind of prepare by grounding in the safety of the present and try to build the ability to be in dual attention, being able to notice what is past, like, and what is present. So I'm here now, that is a memory, to be able to feel that and do activities that enhance that. So we're doing resourcing to increase that ability to be able to hold both the past and the present, kind of as their own separate things. All right. Another thing is we help the parts reconnect safely. So as we talked about before, the apparently now part is really kind of afraid of this emotional part, the part that is holding all of the trauma, because it fears it's just not going to be able to function if they connect. So we're making sure that that part is well resourced, and when they're very well resourced, we're able to kind of connect them and just link the trauma material with something more adaptive, right? So the thing about being in the present is there is more safety generally. For some people, they're still in a dangerous situation. But when we're doing this connection, and we'll do this with fast BLS, this is a time where we're connecting, something that feels dangerous with kind of, we're actually okay now, and we're having those two parts talk to each other. And then we give the emotional part of voice validation, new meaning, and safety. So that's another thing we do with parts work. And that's a time where we're allowing the story to be told, and at the same time giving that part some validation, new meaning about what has happened. Sometimes when we are doing work, there's a lot where we address negative cognitions in EMDR. When we're feeling like I'm not safe, I'm not lovable, we address those at the same time. And that will metabolize as we keep going. All right. And then a final thing that we do is the now part of us, apparently normal part, connects the emotional part to resources and kind of getting to a place of recognizing it's over and we're okay. That's what we do in parts work, and in EMDR work we do something similar, where we're looking at what does this part need? What do we need to kind of move forward? This is where we start moving. It's almost like the amygdala hands over the trauma to the now part to metabolize and let go and release. And so the memory is still there, but the emotional charge has reduced and the insight has increased by the end of this. So that's generally kind of what we're doing with EMDR. Those are the intentions that we have. So I think it's time for me to hand it over, I think, to Ariel.
Thank you, Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Get myself back to gallery. Hello. Just taking a moment before we jump into the next content area to really take all of that information in. And one thing that I'll name is that tonight is really a big picture overview of what is EMDR. And yet, as we deepen into the entire rest of these 60 hours that we have together, we're going to take everything that Carrie just said and slow it all down and expand it all out and go into it via practice. So if that in any way felt like, whoa, that was a lot and it was fast, it was, and it was, and that's okay. So just to kind of like take a moment for your own nervous system to be like, I don't even know that I understood half of that. Don't worry. We are coming back, and especially with a whole lot of both kind of really deep experience of this and also inquiry for yourself as to what about these ideas of what EMDR is resonates and what doesn't. We've all as faculty here had some really enriching conversations among ourselves as to what we love about traditional EMDR and what we haven't loved about it. And we've all had places that we've bumped up against around where some of the traditional approaches to EMDR didn't work for us. And it's why we're creating this combined model with somatics and with parts work, as Carrie just brought in. And what I love about what you just shared, Carrie, is the analogy of the science of what's happening in the brain to the parts work, which I just think is a really fascinating element, that we have parts of our brain that can get kind of exiled off from the whole. And when we look more at parts work, that really is the experience that we have, that there are parts of ourselves that we either are so intensely over-identified with, we think that's all of me, the part that's living in trauma time, or there's parts of us that we are so phobic of or disconnected from or distanced from that we say that's not me, or I don't want to allow that part of me that experienced that trauma to be part of me because that would be too frightening. And so as we progress through this whole program, we'll really explore how do we work with that dilemma. It's very much a dilemma, and it's both a mental, psychological dilemma of how do I let something that's not me be a part of me, something that I don't even want to admit happened to me, become something that I can turn toward and know that I'm bigger than that event or I'm more than that. But it's also a somatic experience, right? And that's why we're here, is that there's this felt experience that we either can be present with, sense, feel, be relatively comfortable with in ourselves, reside in our own skin around. And then there's these experiences that we might have where we go, whoop, right? Anyone know that one? Right? It doesn't even have words sometimes. It's just I can't breathe with that. I can't be with that. In the origins of somatic psychology, I think a lot about Alexander Lowen and his work with bioenergetics. And this concept that he had around pulling away from gravity, that when something is too much for us to be with, to sit with, to feel, to grok, to process, that we in some way or another pull out of the soma, out of the gravitational pull of the feeling body. And where do we go? Right up here. We actually pull up into the upper brain centers to avoid being with the parts of the brain that know how to orient to felt sense. And we, in a sense, pull away from movement. We go into freeze. We pull away from the deep belly breath, right? We restrict the breath to avoid feeling. So my portion of our time together here today is to really, kind of give a very quick understanding, because of course I've spent 3 years in a master's program deepening into what is somatic psychology, and I'm going to relay what is somatic psychology in a relatively short amount of time, knowing that once again, we're going to have the next 60 hours together to really deepen into what is somatics and why is it valuable for trauma treatment. I will, like Carrie, also share a few slides. I noticed that in the Q&A, there were some questions about, can we get the slides? Yes, you will have access to all of our slides. We will make sure. And I also want to assure you that we will do our very best to get them to you before the sessions so that you have a chance to have them in front of you or review them. I understand that's very, very important. And for me, I like that as a learner. So we received that feedback and we'll discuss as a faculty. So with that said, I'm going to pull up a few slides and we'll take a closer look at what is somatic psychology. Here we go. And I'm going to start with this very broad statement here, which is somatic psychology isn't one thing. It's actually an entire field of body-based psychotherapies that explore the role of developmental, social, and cultural events and how they shape our embodiment and identity. And I've spent much of my career looking at the common factors across these different modalities, whether the modality is Hakomi therapy or bioenergetics or Reichian therapy or moving cycle, body-mind centering, somatic experiencing, or sensory motor psychotherapy. And to be fully honest with you, those are just a few of the modalities that are out there in this entire field of body-based psychotherapies. And what I'm most interested to share with you tonight or this morning, depending on your time zone, is the common factors across those modalities. And the first of these common factors is the recognition that difficult life experiences, especially those from early development, contribute to patterns of tension in the body. And the second common factor is that when we build awareness of the felt sense of the body, when we slow down and mindfully pay attention, that can help us access an internal guidance system. It's like an internal compass that's a source of wisdom that actually helps to guide the healing process. However, building awareness of felt sense is vulnerable because, as Bessel van der Kolk would say, the body keeps the score, or as Bob Scaer would say, the body bears the burden of traumatic life events. So the more that we pay attention to the body, the more that we start to feel all of that stuff that perhaps we've been avoiding. So therefore, we need to engage in body awareness and movement or breath awakening at a pace that we can tolerate, or that an individual that we're working with can tolerate. And that it's extraordinarily important to emphasize choice when we're working with others, especially with groups. because the more that we have choice, the more control we sense and have around the process. I'll take this down for just a heartbeat because I like to be able to see your faces as well, which is to say that one of the body-based psychotherapists out there is a woman by the name of Babette Rothschild. And I know one of my assistants will put her name into our chat. And Babette Rothschild has written many books on engaging body awareness and healing. And perhaps one of my favorite quotes of hers is that the goal of the process, the goal of therapy, is to put the client or whoever you're working with in the driver's seat, right? That what trauma does to us is it removes a sense of control. We feel thrown into an abyss that feels so profoundly overwhelming to our senses, to our mind, to our emotions. And we feel like all of a sudden we've been thrown into the back seat or the back of the bus, and life is taking us for a ride, right? So when we are engaging in body-based trauma therapies or EMDR-based trauma therapies, we're trying to restore a sense of control, a sense of autonomy, a sense of agency to the individual, a sense of dignity that is reclaimed when we get to feel like we have choice all along the way. I have seen the impact of therapies that move too quickly. And when that sense of choice and agency falls into the person that's in a seat of power, which might be a therapist or a treatment provider, and they've got a set of goals or a timeline, and if that's not in alignment with the needs of the individual, we can do harm, right? So part of what we're going to do across this whole program, and that's a core value among all of us, is about pacing, is about right timing and really, really listening, not to what we think we can handle, because trust me, so many of us are like, bring it on, I can do it, I can handle it. And then when it really comes down to metabolizing and being with and sensing and feeling, the body moves at a pace that is way slower than the mind. And so a lot of our work, as you'll feel from all of us, is about slowing it down so that we can, both as a practitioner and as a receiver of the work, really be able to be present in the way that can allow the deeper transformation to occur. Into another slide here. So as we speak about somatic psychology, we can also look at some of the science out there about embodiment. One of the great researchers on the topic of embodiment, and I apologize, I don't have his name on the slide, but we'll get it here for you. His name is Alan Fogel, Fogel, and he's written several books out there really studying what is embodiment. And one of those books is called Body Sense, and he's got another one that I don't recall the name of. It's a little more recent. But embodiment, as we study it, is really this combined experience of sensations and emotions and movement impulses and awareness of all of that in the present moment. But it's often, and this is very linked to what Carrie was saying about EMDR, is that, one memory might link us to other memories. And likewise, our sensations in the present moment might be quite linked or related to our historical events. Maybe also related to what's happening in the present moment that is shaping us, that is informing how we're sensing ourselves. The way that I like to think about that, and I'll take this down for a second, but think about yourself walking through a really busy city, right? Like for me, I grew up outside of New York City, and walking through the streets of New York City, it's got sounds, it's got proximity to other people, it's got a pace to it, right? So maybe if you're in Australia, you're walking through Sydney, right? Take it to where it's relevant for you. And just notice, how does your body respond to the idea of walking through an environment where there's a lot of people, maybe there's a faster pace, maybe there's a lot of sounds. And then in contrast, think about what it feels like when you're in a very spacious environment, maybe by the seashore, maybe in a place in nature, maybe in a spiritual retreat, right? A respite of some kind. How does your body feel when you even think about being in one of those environments? What changes? How does your breath respond? How much space do you feel capable of taking up? So we really learned that our experience of embodiment is quite interlinked with our environment and the people that we're with. And therefore, as we explore and unpack all of this together throughout the program, we also keep in mind that our embodiment is inextricably linked to the people that we're embodying around. And that when we're sitting with another person or within a group to do our trauma-related healing, that exchange is equally important to pay attention to, and your own embodiment that you are bringing to the process is an essential ingredient. And unfortunately, one of the problematic aspects to psychotherapy in general and to the medicalization of psychology and to the colonization of this field has been ways in which we observe the other as separate. We observe the other as an object that we then have the power to change. And it's a disturbing component of the whole big picture, isn't it? And so in order to decolonize this process, we need to start right here with ourselves, both with the awareness of what we're bringing into the room, our role in that process, our inherent power in our role, and also the ways in which we disembody in service of a role. And to be willing to show up more as human than as expert. Oh. It's so freeing. It's profoundly freeing. And it's why I feel so proud to be here with this team with Embody Lab, is that it's part of this movement. And that as we're taking this and broadening this whole lens, we are able to really show up person to person first. And to know that, that I am equally willing to show up as client or as someone who's here in service of my own evolution as I am in the practitioner seat. And I really deeply hope to impart that is an essential value inside of both somatics and also this somatic EMDR model that we're bringing. So thank you. I went a little off script there, but it felt so important, so necessary. And I'm loving this. I caught that, and I'm going to just really pause here and identify. We haven't really paused on what EMDR stands for. And so let me just break that down for a second. It stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it's the model, as Carrie was speaking about, developed by Francine Shapiro, that really maximized on this understanding that eye movements, which of course is part of our body, has a profound impact on memory desensitization, or basically reducing the power that difficult memories have over us. We're pulling the distress out of the image or out of that inherently upsetting event. And we'll talk, of course, so much more about that as we go. All righty, I'm going back into our slides. So coming back to Alan Fogel's work and this science of embodiment, that we are integrating multiple sensory feedback systems so that we can ultimately have a whole sense of self. And Scott really led us through this. He set me up well here today with his arriving practice, that he started us out today with sensing the external experience of the body, basically the skin and this external space. He then moved us into a proprioceptive sense of your body in space. But if I break down these words, exteroception simply means your five senses. It's what you see externally or sense externally in the world. Proprioception is where your body lives in space. It's where you begin and end. And interoception is the interior of your body. It's what you're feeling on the inside. Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Am I hot? Am I cold? Do I have pain? Are there areas of ease? How's my breath moving? Maybe I feel my heartbeat. Those are all examples of interoceptive feedback. And how we gain how we enhance these sensory feedback systems is simply by where we place our attention. Are we placing our attention outside of us on those external senses? Are we focusing our attention inside of us on the internal felt sense of the body? Or are we focusing our attention on where my body is in space? And we can enhance that by things like movement or pressure. Right? If you were to just take a moment with me and press palm into palm, and just give it a nice firm press, almost so much that your hands even shake a little bit. And then soften that press and perhaps begin to still sense that you can feel where your arms are in space because that pressure gave you feedback. And if you lose that felt sense of your arms, press again, wake it up through a little bit of muscular engagement, firm press, and then release the press. And can you still sense your arms in space? So very often to enhance that proprioceptive feedback, we need a little bit of something to push against. We have a little bit of muscular engagement. And if you've ever heard of something called progressive muscle relaxation, it functions because when we can contract around the muscles, when we contract, like when Scott had us do this condensing practice today, that enhances proprioception. You can feel the engagement of the muscles, and now your brain has registered that sensation, and it's easier to be more at choice about, wow, now that I can feel the tension in my shoulders, oh, I can let it go. And then it's very freeing. All right. Going back into our slides, I'm moving a little quickly just for time's sake, but again, we're going to come back to really all of these topics again. That part of how we build the embodied felt sense experiences through mindfulness and the mindfulness of the body, or what one of my professors in grad school refers to as bodyfulness, that we are paying attention and sensing and feeling the body mindfully. And this is the ability to then observe or be present with, to sense and to feel your moment by moment experience of embodiment. Another look at the science of embodiment is through the work of a man named Antonio Damasio. And he has many books out there that really speak to what I refer to as somatic intelligence. One of those books is called The Feeling of What Happens. And Damasio's work actually came about by studying individuals who had damage to the brain, especially the part of the brain that helps us sense and feel the body. And when we have damage to the part of the brain that helps us sense and feel the body, it actually begins to impact other life qualities like our emotional regulation or affect regulation, or it impacts our ability to make decisions in a way that really is wise or best serving my life. Without body awareness, when we have damage to the part of the brain that interferes with our ability to sense the body, it impacts our empathy. It decreases the effectiveness of our communications and our relationships. And so let's look at the converse of this. When we have awareness of the body, when we have embodiment practices that builds this reservoir of kinesthetic and somatic awareness, of bodily awareness, that it actually enhances affect regulation. We're better able to sense and feel when I have an emotion, and I'm better able to respond effectively to it. That we are able to make wise decisions. We are really able to enhance our interpersonal relationships and our communications. We have more empathy, and it helps inform the impact of trauma because we can sense it in the body, and therefore we can sense when it's resolved. So a little bit of the background of Damasio's research here is that he was studying individuals that had specific damage to where the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that can basically pay attention or serves as our observing witness or reflection capacity, and that it impacted the connection between that prefrontal cortex and another part of the brain called the insula. And the insula is the part of the brain that basically helps us have a little map of the body inside. It kind of takes all of the interoceptive feedback of our somatic experience and lets the brain register that. So when we have damage to that part of the brain, individuals who were walking through the world, maybe, like very faithful to their partner, making really wise choices, all of a sudden they started to become gambling addicts. All of a sudden they started going out drinking. They started to lose empathy for their partners. All of these changes started to happen in response to the damage to this part of the brain. And so he came to this conclusion that it's our ability to reflect upon the somatic experience that provides a kind of conscience for us. I like to think of it as that conscious somatic awareness or mindful body awareness serves like our Jiminy Cricket, and that he says that it catches the feeling of what happens and registers it as a memory. So now we can sense the impact of previous events and choices that I made and their consequences. So I don't know if you're a parent, perhaps you've been through these conversations with your children, or perhaps you've had these conversations with yourself at certain times in your own development of like, well, I see you made that choice. And how did that work out for you? And how did that feel? Right? So, okay, I went out drinking. I drank too much. I said these really unkind things to my friends. They were pretty mad at me the next day. All of that feels pretty yucky, right? Just, an example of something. And that now I can take that yucky feeling, that regret or that discomfort, and it can be in service of making a wise choice for the next time that maybe I have that opportunity to go out with that group of friends or whatever it might be. And so we use the feeling of what happens to guide our decisions. Otherwise, we end up like Pinocchio on Pleasure Island and we never get off. That's a reference, right? We need our Jiminy Cricket of our conscience to say, hey, did that feel good? Is that your best self? And that this, again, all requires slowing down and being with the felt sense, not so much as a way to punish yourself or go into shame, but to kind of catch the power of regret, perhaps, and use that in service of a new choice. And conversely, we also get to catch the power of what feels good. What actually is in service of our wisest, best self, and how does our body give us feedback about that as well? Okay, a few more slides. When we look at historical perspectives, and we're going to have a whole nother lecture on this topic coming around the bend, but I love these images. They come from some of the early somatic therapists, this Reichian bands, Wilhelm Reich, and this idea that when we experience difficult life events, we hold tension in the body. This image of the belts here comes from a man named Stanley Kellerman. He has a really interesting book out there called Emotional Anatomy. And that this, again, ways in which we restrict around areas of the body that are most vulnerable to tension, very often around the trunk and core of the body, our pelvis and pelvic floor, our abdominal cavity, restricting movement around our organs. Maybe it's in the diaphragm, restricting our breath, across the chest and bracing. Maybe it's in the throat, losing your voice. Maybe it's around our jaw, clenching the jaw, or the ocular band around the eyes. And we'll have opportunities in future classes to explore how do we unwind this. But what we do know is that the somatic approaches emphasize movement and breath and interoceptive awareness as keys to releasing these blocks. And that historically in the somatics arena, we focused on catharsis, big, powerful release, the primal scream of Arthur Janov, right? Really banging the pillows. And that the field of somatic psychology has evolved. This isn't to say that catharsis is all bad, but that the field has evolved into more of a containment approach or a mindfully based approach to really paying attention to the body, and that the release gets to happen in a more paced manner so that we don't overwhelm ourselves or others. When we look at embodiment, it is expressed through our facial expressions, through our postures, our gestures, our voice tone, our interactional styles, movement patterns, emotions, and behaviors. And this is across culture, and it's across ability levels, and it's across ages, although I just chose kids for this particular slide. But, we are very much looking at all of these layers of communication, primarily nonverbal layers of communication, when we're working in somatics. And that posture, I'll borrow from Pat Ogden, the developer of sensory motor psychotherapy. She refers to posture as a form of implicit memory, meaning that these are the memories that we form and that we form in the first few years of life, and that kind of form the basis of our felt sense of self. They form before we have words. It's not a verbal memory. It's how we feel inside the self. And I love this particular quote that Pat offers as she speaks about posture. She says, "We are what we repeatedly do. Our bodies will shape themselves around how we feel. And then the more that we carry that shape in the world, the more that informs our overall sense of self. Then on top of that, postures become positions from which only select emotions and behaviors can become possible." So I'll invite just a tiny little visiting of this, and we're going to visit this so much more in future lectures. But just to say that if you imagine an animal that has been beat, right? What does that animal do? It tucks its tail, right? It gets smaller. And if we think about a child for whom that's occurred, that tendency to curl or to in some way protect ourselves, or conversely, maybe to brace and get bigger than that which hurt us. We have different ways of protecting ourselves through the body. And that as we heal and unwind from trauma, we return in some way or another to movement and to a greater sense of freedom and flexibility. Not flexibility like I can put my leg around my neck, but flexibility in terms of the range of options, in terms of that postural expression of self and the felt self that accompanies it. Just a little more here. Sticking with an influence here from Pat Ogden and Kakuni Minton in this case, and their sensory motor psychotherapy, I will share two key factors of that work. One is this concept of relational alchemy, which recognizes that as a dyad or as a gathering, if you're working with groups, it is an expression of the here-now relationship. And I, in a sense, already spoke to this, that who I'm with is an expression of me and I'm an expression of them. We co-create the relational exchange, and that the embodied experience is something that is awakened between us. It's a mutuality. And so therefore, I'm not here just observing the other as a separateness, but it's an exchange. And then there's this concept that Pat offers of embedded relational mindfulness, that therapist and client or practitioner and receiver are together mindfully studying the embodied relational experience that emerges between us. So we can think of the exchange as a shared mindfulness experience, and that we are mindfully studying for ourselves and perhaps between us changes in eye contact or breathing or posture or movement and gesture. Maybe it's internal changes of heart rate or muscle tone or how you're breathing. Maybe it's facial expressions or voice tone, vocal prosody or the loss of it, or swallowing or changes in level of energy and alertness. As we speak about somatic trauma reprocessing, it tends to occur in a regulation-based manner where we're really tracking much more slowly. It's less of that catharsis emphasis. It's a slow release of tension through movement with an emphasis on regulation of arousal states. We're turning towards small amounts of distress with the goal of discharging physical tension, or what in somatic experiencing Peter Levine refers to as titration. We're not going for all of the distress at once. We take just one small bit and we pause and we integrate. And that when we have a new experience, something emerges, something begins to move through us, and we have a sense of a sequence where maybe it's an emotion and we feel that movement from belly to heart to throat and then out through the eyes. Maybe it's out through the arms, maybe through the legs, a little bit of shaking. And we have opportunities to finally complete movement sequences slowly and mindfully that didn't get to happen at the time of the trauma. As we look at ways that somatics can help us organize our work with others, I think of this also as having phases. And just like Carrie was saying about EMDR not being linear, the phases of a somatic session don't have to be linear either. We do typically want to have some idea of what will our focus be for a session, and then we can help to build more somatic resources. And we're going to talk about this in a future lecture. Then we can build more of an understanding of the impact of the trauma. What happened? What happened? And how does the body hold the feeling of that? The body helps us deepen into the original wound. But the body also holds the memory of what wanted to happen and helps us find a reparative experience. So if I didn't get to walk out of that room, I can feel that my body can move now. If I didn't get to call for help, I can use my voice now and have a new experience, which then facilitates that sequence or that somatic release. And again, we would take our time at the end of a session or a grouping of sessions to integrate a new experience. Somatic therapies aren't just a set of interventions, right? They are the foundation of the attuned presence of the practitioner. And I'll borrow one final concept here before I bring you into a little bit of a practice, and then I'll turn it over to Craig. And that this concept is one of organicity, and it was offered by Ron Kurtz, who developed the Hakomi method. And organicity basically holds that inside of every organism, whether that is the acorn of a tree, the seed of a flower, or a human being, that there is an inner wisdom that is self-directing and self-correcting and helps us unfold towards wholeness. It holds the potential of who we can evolve to be. It's profound. And that just like we'll talk about with classic EMDR therapy, there's tremendous parallels. Francine Shapiro saw the same thing, right? When we look at the core of really good healing modalities, they all recognize that we have within us the capacity to heal, given that we have enough access to support. So the practice that I want to offer here in closing comes from one of my key mentors, Christine Caldwell. And this is a key foundational practice that really will form a foundation for everything that we do. We will revisit this again in future lectures, but it's the recognition that when we identify that our attention is a key component of healing, then we start to pay attention to, where is my attention going? And that wakes up the witness. Now we can start to be curious of how am I devoting my attention? Is it to the internal experience of my inside my body? Is it external to my environment? Is my attention very narrowly focused on just one thing? Or is it very panoramically focused on taking in the whole room? Is my attention immersive, meaning that I'm fully, deeply, resoundingly inside of a felt experience or a sensation or a taste or a smell? Or am I stepping back? Am I distancing and observing it and noticing? These are all different qualities of attention. And the truth is, we all have different attentional preferences, and it's just good to know your attentional preferences. So while I'll share a little brief introduction to this experientially, I also want to know that we'll be revisiting this one again and again. So from an experiential standpoint, I'll just take us through maybe 3 minutes of an experiential process, and then Craig, I'm going to turn it over to you. And this brief visiting of this experiential process for us all, if you so choose, everything is opt in or opt out, depending on what feels right for you. I'd like you to start by just simply noticing where your attention is falling in the moment. Right? Of course, you've been listening to me and looking at some slides. It's very likely more externally focused. And just getting to know whether your attention is very narrowly focused, which again, perhaps it has been based on taking in a lot of information. We've been quite immersive, really deepening into something. And in this moment, I'm inviting you to step back and just become a little bit more aligned with the observer of your attention. And now I've got a choice point for you. Would you like to have the focus of your attention external, or would you like to bring the focus of your attention internal? And just notice how it feels, what feels like a yes to you. Internal focus of your attention does not require that you close your eyes, but sometimes that can be helpful. If you're bringing your attention internally, you might become more aware of the felt sense of your body, that interoceptive feedback. If your attention is more external, you might be more aware of those external sights and sounds. Maybe the felt sense of the air on your skin. And you might notice how it feels to move between those domains. So if you do choose to bring your attention internal, notice that experience, the level of comfort or discomfort that is there for you. And then the invitation perhaps to bring your attention back external. And notice if the transition is a little sticky, like, ooh, I don't feel quite ready to come back out. No right, no wrong, feedback. Or perhaps that stickiness is, ooh, I don't know that I want to go internal. Just information. Another domain here in our short visit of this is what happens if you bring your attention very panoramic, sensing the whole of the space or maybe the gallery view of our Zoom screen, right? What happens when you broaden out? If you have a view out a window, maybe you broaden out to the landscape outside, right? Letting your eyes even take in a broader swath. And then you might choose to bring your attention very narrow, just one thing. And you can play with panoramic to focused in that external domain. And you can also play with that in the internal domain, right? Do I feel my whole body? Is there one sensation that's calling for my attention? And the final set of parameters here is, as you notice maybe just one thing, if you go towards a little focus of your attention, let yourself fully immerse, get to know it. Whether that's an internal sensation or maybe you choose just one thing to sense and feel external to you. Noticing the texture, or if you're looking at something, noticing the color. You can deeply immerse and then practice what it's like to distance yourself from that object of your attention, whether it's inside of you or outside. Noticing it, not just literally putting it further away, but noticing it as the observer. These domains of attention become key elements in the application of somatic EMDR therapy. Because with trauma, attention tends to get stuck. And we have opportunities to free that up. And obviously I can speak a lot, but I want to turn this over to my colleague here. So Craig, thank you for your patience.
Well, hello, everybody. And for tonight, I'm not going to be presenting any kind of PowerPoint or slides. I'll be doing that more in the presentations as we go. But so I want to address this question of what is integrative approach with EMDR and somatics, or why do it? So think for a moment for yourself. If you get cold, do you tell your skin to contract? Or if something's scary to you, do you, like Ariel spoke before, I can't breathe. Do you invite your breath to tighten up so that you can't breathe? Or your throat to tighten, you're trying to talk, and all of a sudden it's like this, right? All these things happen spontaneously for us. And these responses are driven by parts of the brain and the nervous system that do not have verbal language. Right? You can tell yourself to relax, and you can tell yourself, okay, I'm clear about this, that abuse that happened 30 years ago is over, the guy's dead, all that's going on. And I think about it, and my nervous system still responds as if I'm in danger in the moment. And so think about how that can happen for you. All the understanding of the world, and nervous system still goes, right? And lots of cognitive therapy and lots of understanding and lots of insight, and the body still does these kind of responses. And then it's going to kick in adrenaline and all the other stuff that makes it hard for us to function well, hard for us to think so well. We kind of lose that sense of presence that Ariel was talking about, and then we don't function as well. And we're going, I know that's over. How come I'm still doing that? And then we get diagnoses like jerk or stupid, right? And people are going, what is going on with me that I can't work through these things? And often it happens, people can be in therapy for years, all the understanding and not be able to work through. So this value of integrating certainly the power of EMDR and using bilateral stimulation, which helps us process things more efficiently. You do the left-right stimulation, and there's some stuff we know about and some stuff we don't, but people can process through things and have a new sense of objectivity arise in the work they haven't been able to have before. So when I first learned EMDR, I thought, wow, this is really wonderful. It's so efficient. It's so helpful. People can take in the work so they can resolve things in ways they haven't been able to. And then I kept saying, well, what about the times when it doesn't seem to be working the way it's, quote, supposed to? Or what about the times when something's going on and I'm having trouble figuring out what's happening? So then for me, it was like, I need to find some other way to track what's going on with my clients while they're having this very powerful experience. And so one of the things that can really help is, especially since there's no consciousness about these nervous system responses, is that we can bring awareness into the body, bring awareness into these physical sensations. And that awareness can work for us in ways, the awareness of the physical sensation can actually help us impact what happens on a nervous system level that, in ways that language can't do. So we can bring our awareness to the physical sensations. And it's kind of weird, but it's actually the language of the nervous system. And when we bring more awareness in, we can actually intervene with people on a nervous system level in ways that just talking about it can't do. So this really adds a whole different dimension to the work. So think about some situation for yourself where something happens that's disturbing, and see if you can feel for yourself right now, like what happens in your body as you think about some disturbance. And it might even be subtle. It'd be some kind of tensing, or or you might feel yourself kind of going away or getting tired, right? So all these shifts start to happen involuntarily. All these things that show up are the perfect expression of how this is held in the nervous system. Let's say I tighten up and I turn my head to the left. It's not to the right, it's to the left, right? I don't have to interpret it. I don't have to know what that means, but somehow the nervous system goes, do this right now, right? And when we bring more awareness to that, that can give us so much information that really helps guide the work, that we can help people work through whatever's going on. So I'll just give an example. We all have tons of examples that just happened in the last session I did. This woman comes in and she's talking about this episode where the night before her husband was playing with the kids and telling jokes in a certain way. And all of a sudden she finds herself scared and furious. She's going, what is going on here? Right? I'm just, I like that he's playing with the kids and I'm just getting all upset. And so she has to go and try to calm herself, but she can't figure out. So she comes into the session with this, and there's all this tension. She can barely breathe as she talks about it. So we start just really bringing attention to the specifics of these physical sensations as she's talking about it. And more emotion starts coming down. If we're slowing it down, Ariel is referencing pacing. How do we slow it down? So we're going to be teaching you how to bring more detailed awareness to specific things that are happening in the moment, which can both slow the work down and open it up more so that the things that are driving it that aren't so obvious have a chance to start surfacing. So this makes the work easier for us because more stuff gets revealed. We don't have to guess. We don't have to interpret. We don't have to figure stuff out ahead of time. These things have a chance to surface more. And so back to that, respectful place for the therapist, we can be in this position of just for facilitating their own organic process. And it's not so accessible if they're just coming cognitively, but these things become much more accessible if we're tracking through the body and through the nervous system. So for her, she stayed with all this tension, and she was struggling with it. And so we had to go slowly to whole little bits because at times she started to get overwhelmed. And then as we held smaller pieces, like Ariel was talking about, that kind of idea of titrating, smaller pieces, she could start holding them longer. When she held them longer, more awareness started to come up. And spontaneously, this memory comes up of being in the living room with her dad when he's telling jokes at everybody's expense and he's humiliating everybody and there's no way out. And then she could feel all this trapped response that was happening as she sat there today from something from 35 years ago, right? So we didn't have to like dig around and find the memory came right up. So part of what happens is we get upset and we get activated. If we go into more of a a higher aroused, that kind of fight flight thing, things start going faster. The nervous system's going, get me out of here, and everything speeds up. But it's kind of like this, like how many fingers, right? And it's like, I don't know, it's going by too fast. I can't even see. So when we start asking questions and slowing it down, it's like the details help to slow this down. It's like, oh, it actually went from 4 to 2. I didn't even see that, right? I couldn't tell when it's going by this fast. And we can't do therapy from that place. So part of this integrated thing with the somatic work with EMDR is we're helping to pace the work so that it becomes workable. So we can see shifts in activation. And we're going to be talking about things like resilience and how do people stay in a state that's more present and workable versus when we get too upset and go, like, my hair's on fire. Or if something happens in the nervous system that makes us kind of drop out and get droopy and sleepy and we can't put our thoughts together, right? Both things happen without our asking it to. There's all these involuntary responses, and we can get access to those. We can see signs of those. They can help direct us about where am I going to notice this and slow things down to help that organic process of people being able to work through things to happen. So when we bring in the somatics, it gives us a whole different set of data to work off of that happens in the moment. It can be very accessible, but that's not accessible if we're just going cognitive. Right? And that's what's really impressed me. So the combining of this being able to track the nervous system and to use the bilateral stimulation and EMDR at the same time, those are two very powerful forces. And working them together is like, that's why I do this, because it's the most efficient thing I've ever found in therapy, right? And putting these pieces together. So you're going to learn a lot about tracking resiliency, getting really close data about what happens. What am I seeing on a nervous system level that goes, there's a something. I don't know what it is yet, but they're talking about this, and all of a sudden this starts happening in their voice, right? I can bring awareness to that. Here's the perfect expression about how my nervous system's going, uh-oh, right? So there's a sense of activation there. Great place to work, great place to intervene. So we can help you get a sense of like, oh, I can pay attention to that. That's going to help direct my focus. That's going to help the work get easier for me, possibly more intense for the client, but we'll talk about how to make agreements about all that and work with that so people don't get overwhelmed. And I think that's one of the difficult things that I found with EMDR. The way it was taught to me is like things can move so quickly if we're not paying attention to the level of activation that happens. Sometimes people work through things, but sometimes people get activated beyond their ability to really be present. And that's not a helpful place to work. So I'll just tell this brief story. When I first learned EMDR and I'm seeing people make all these fantastic changes and I'm thinking, wow, this is great. This woman comes in and she's having panic attacks. So she's in the session, she starts to have a panic attack, and I'm doing the bilateral with her. I've been doing this for 4 weeks. I know what I'm doing. Um, so I keep staying with the bilateral, and she keeps getting more and more activated. And I'm thinking, hasn't had enough bilateral stimulation yet, right? So I'm trying to bilateral her through her panic attack. She keeps going more hyper aroused and more, and she's not dealing with it. And I'm not tracking what's happening for her. I'm hoping that the bilateral brings her back, and it doesn't. And to her credit, she didn't come back after the third session. I wish I knew how to contact her now because I owe her a big apology. But we can track these shifts in activation and these shifts that often do happen faster with EMDR and bilateral, so that we can keep the work in a manageable range. And Ariel was talking about safety. right? And that's where we can establish safety in the sessions. So our clients have a sense of trust in themselves, in their own process, in us, and people start to learn about their own nature, right? Because it's a very powerful thing that if we bring awareness to things that are difficult and we're resilient, there's something in us that's always driving for completion, that's always going to drive for that working through, right? That Ariel mentioned before. That's a very powerful part of our nature. If we get overwhelmed, we're not able to work through things. So again, just think for yourself for a second. Are there times when you can think better and work through stuff better, and other times when you're not very good at it? Right. So just think about that for yourself. And maybe it's like, oh, I'm so stressed out I can't think, or I'm so disconnected I can't think. We all go into these states, right? And it's not a good place to try to do therapy. So it's not wrong if people go there, but we can notice it and we can help them get back into that more resilient place to work efficiently. So this is really the value of bringing these things together. The somatic piece gives us a whole set of information that makes the work more workable, right? That puts you in a position of not having to interpret, to be able to be in a position about, I don't have a clue what's coming next, but I'm paying attention, right? We don't have to know what's coming next, and we can't. But it can help you be in a position of being okay in the not knowing, knowing what you're paying attention to. It's a much better place to work from. So this is a lot of the pieces that we'll be presenting and you'll be learning here. And our hope in all this is that you find a way of working that really has that organicity to it. That can lead you in it so you have confidence about what you're doing. And you can know, I can pay attention to these things. These are going to guide my work. Right? So it's not necessarily learning a bunch of theory. It's learning how to notice and use your noticing well. Okay. How are we doing for time here, Ariel? Because are we gonna do that little demo?
Too. I think we should do a little demo, but
Okay.
we'll keep it short. I
Okay.
think our assistants are doing a great job managing our Q&A too. So we'll take 10
Okay.
minutes and then we'll take a few
Okay.
questions at the end.
So this is just a little demonstration that Ariel and I are going to do. And so we'll just start this off briefly, like you've done these kind of centering or presence exercises. And when we do it as a group, then everybody's just kind of responding on their own. So we're going to start off. First, I'm going to ask Ariel if we do some bilateral, will you be tapping on yourself or using tappers? How will you be doing that?
I'll go ahead and self-tap.
Okay. And she already knows how to do that with a new client. We'll talk about how to introduce this. So let's just take a moment here, Ariel. Bring your awareness in as much as you can and just notice any physical sensation that's happening for you right now. You nod your head. And what are you noticing?
Mostly it's like a little bit of a catch right at the center of my diaphragm.
And can you describe that catch a little bit more, sensation-wise?
Yeah. I mean, as soon as I name it, it begins to move a little, but what I'll say is there's more warmth here, a little bit of heat here, and that heat resonates right between here, and as I'm speaking about it, right up here behind my sternum.
Great. Okay. So just to say for a second, so what I'm doing is I'm trying to establish, is Ariel present, right? And her ability to give me details of something that she feels lets me know she's present. If she was going, I don't know, then it was like, then we'll talk about how to work with that. So she's pretty present. So can give good details and can even feel movement. So from here, Ariel, do you have a sense about what you'd want to focus on here today?
The the sensation has a little bit of a contracting inward.
It's got
And
this kind of,
yes.
Mhm.
And I'd love to just learn from it a little bit. I don't necessarily have a story that accompanies it.
There's no story, but it's this. So
Yeah.
just take a moment and like it sounds like you've got good awareness of this. And as you do this, see anything else, including any emotion that comes up that goes with this for you right now. Starts to move.
As I follow it,
Hmm.
it goes a little further into that curling inward,
Hmm.
and it has a little bit of a with it.
Ah,
So,
okay. So, and with that sound in your tongue and
yeah,
yeah,
and then right here in my face,
that kind of scrunch. Okay. And any emotion that goes with that scrunch.
somewhere between fear and yuck, if yuck were
Fear,
an emotion.
yeah.
Disgust, I suppose.
Yeah. And then you even laugh about it a little bit as you
Yeah,
say
there's a little humor in there too, but for sure,
yeah. Okay. And you said there's no particular context for this that comes up with it right now. You're just curious about this.
Yeah, I mean, historically, is it a completely new feeling? It isn't. It's something that I'm familiar with in myself, um, and what's powerful, I guess, is that I can, in a sense, come out of it as well,
Mhm.
right? Like
Mhm.
I can curl toward it, which amplifies, of course,
Okay.
and as I
So
come
without,
out of it, it's a little bit freer.
oh, okay. So you can even feel that difference between here
Yes.
and here. Okay.
Yes.
So are you still wanting to work with this part? So just take a minute without thinking too much and just like okay, there's that with the right, whatever's there. Yeah, you got that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So while you're holding this and you're feeling it there, so why don't you just start doing that left right tap, and even if you're here, you could, yeah.
Well,
Mhm.
something shifted, but
Mhm.
where it went to was to almost right to the back of my skull,
Mhm.
and my whole head wanted to go like that.
Uh, and so as you feel this and it wants to, and notice like, is it doing it or is it just you want
Yes.
to?
It's I mean it's a bit automatic, but it's almost like this just wants to do this. So I'm going to follow that. I'm actually just going to let that be the bilateral.
Okay. Or you can tap on yourself also while that's happening, either way. Mhm. Mhm. Goes a little faster. Mhm.
I'm
And you can keep tapping. Just tell me what's coming up here.
going to pause the tap just for
Okay.
my pacing. And I'm going to take a moment just to orient for myself. The Again, without much of a story, but more a little bit out of that disgust
Mhm.
into more
Mhm.
of a this, like a
This is happening from there. Okay.
yeah,
Mm.
like ugh.
So take your time. Mhm. Mhm.
Like a running feeling. Very much my heartbeat's going. I can even, sorry for the TMI, but I can kind of smell my sweat. Like it's got a lot of, there's a release that's with this.
It has this kind of a
Yeah. Yeah.
to it.
Still
And
has some.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And any emotion that's going with this right now?
more somatic than emotional content, but a lot of heart rate. There's just a lot of woo, like, whoa.
Okay. So we're going to stop here just for this short demo. So even as we're stopping here and you got this going,
Yeah.
so just to take a moment with yourself and notice like anything that's sitting with you as we're closing this down here.
It reminds me of a question that once showed up in a previous session, and I'm going to name it here because it feels resourcing for me right here.
Huh?
It feels resourcing for me right here. And the question is not only what am I running away from, but what am I running toward?
Both.
Mm-hmm. And to sense the quality of the fear response that's in here of the running away. But when I name and even just hold this image and feel the connection with you for a moment of what am I running toward?
Mm-hmm.
It feels like a just a very tender arriving back into the okayness of all of that.
And something's happening here, right under your hand here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's it. Just take a moment, just notice that.
I feel actually a whole lot of joy, like in a sense, if there's the me and the personal layers of this, and even the ancestral layers of this pattern as they live in me. And then there's also the very clear knowing in me that I'm doing this in a group of 650 of us right now. And that I think the amount of that shared nervous anticipatory excitement is here for me too.
Okay, well, thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
So we'll, this is just a brief little thing, and we can talk more as we go about, like, you probably noticed that I was mirroring her a lot, and we'll talk about that and the value for me as a therapist to do that, and also what happens with the client, eyes open, eyes closed. So that's something that we'll go into too, that can just help raise that somatic awareness even more, which can be a very helpful thing. Okay. All right. So are we shifting into questions
Yeah,
here?
we'll shift into some questions. We'll bring Carrie and I back on and join you all. So let's take a moment. I just want to acknowledge the sort of arc that we've gone through tonight. We've said hello to each other. We said hello to ourselves and what's present in us. And we started with a overview of EMDR. And then we went into more of what is somatics and somatic therapy. Then we got an opportunity to hear from Craig as well. Why, in a deeper level, why are we integrating in the somatics and EMDR? And even now, an opportunity just to see it in action. I'm going to invite you just to pause and take that in. So that sacred pause. How am I doing now? You might notice there's an eager part of you, a part that desires, when are we going to do this? Where are we going to get to that? And we get to embody the principles of somatic EMDR right now and go, ooh, in the same way we're going to support someone pacing themselves, we're pacing ourselves now. We're not going to get it all tonight. We're just getting to dip in or even see the lake that we will be dipping into. And we'll find all the aquatic life in there and all the things and treasures that we will discover as we pace our way through this process together. Yeah, thank you. I say that because I, as an eager learner too, even feel my own like, ooh, excitement and nervousness and when are we getting to this and when are we getting to that? And to notice, am I already in the future? And can I come back to what's here and now? What's here in myself? Ooh, there's a bubbliness. What's here in the conversation, the content. Yeah. And to know there's a arc, there's a pacing to this whole process, unveiling after unveiling of like an onion. Yeah. Till we get to the core of ourselves with this work and the material. Yeah. I just want to give you a lovely reminder or a reminder of the lovely process we get to go through together. This. And I the assistants did a great job of answering questions as we were going along. And I'm just going to check into the questions. Yeah. I think there's a general question that we can kind of go to. I saw it posed and is like, who is this work for?
Mm.
And I actually really love that question because and we'll turn it back to each of us just as a way of going, okay, we saw some of the work, we heard kind of the overview. And then who is this work for now that we've gotten a chance to see it and sort of understand it in more context? I heard you, Ariel. So I don't know if that meant you want to go first.
My first response is for anyone. I mean, right? Like when we first learn about EMDR, we get this idea that it's somehow like just for PTSD. And then we've broadened out beyond that to recognizing that, well, it has value for anxiety, well, it has value for depression, it has value for all of these other presentations. And then we kind of go transdiagnostic and we really look at maybe we don't need a diagnosis at all. Maybe we don't need to have something wrong with us to benefit from support for processing. And maybe then the question is, who's it not for? And the question, I think, is more so about readiness than someone isn't necessarily would benefit from this. It's more about like, do you have enough resources to go toward and something challenging? And not every EMDR session means we're going towards a trauma target, right? We can do beautiful EMDR sessions that are about building resource.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful frame to Ariel. Like you might do an EMDR session to deepen joy and the embodiment of joy. And that's a really delightful session too. And sometimes very vulnerable. Yeah. Sorry, Carrie, I saw you unmute yourself.
Well, I am just thinking about, I think that I agree with Ariel that it is about everyone can benefit from it. And at the same time, we might need to temper our expectations about what it can offer. Because bipolar disorder, it probably is not going to 100% resolve, but there might be a pain of the pain that it helps to work with as well. The same thing with biological disorders. I don't necessarily think it's going to cure all the biological disorders. However, the pain of the pain might be what it helps with and what can, help people just cope with the fact that this is what's going on in their body. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That pesky unmute button.
Tagging on that,
Yeah.
is this piece that like, so you're basically talking, there's a process about having pain or having a disease or whatever it might be. And there's ways that we react to that. And there's always process, right? And so one of the things that this work can help us do is to really engage in a client with their process. We can't, make their broken arm just get better or their chronic back pain. But there's, even with something like that, there tends to be like a constriction that goes with it. And there's a constricting dynamic, and we can often go in and work with that. So there's potential to work with so many aspects of people's process. And it's the hardest thing for any of us to see in ourselves, right? I don't know that I tighten up at a certain moment, but when I become more aware of it and work with it, has a chance to work through differently. So I think this training is for us as practitioners to get more present and embodied ourselves. And as we do that, it can help us engage in our client's process in that place of unknown that just makes the work more fluid and takes advantage of that we all do have that drive to take things forward.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's also a beautiful recognition that what is our capacity as practitioners to work with another human will also impact who we work with and and so, it's really, we're not working with someone's diagnosis, we're working with the human that's present. And I see so many great anticipatory questions, like will we get to um, bilateral, and will we get to resourcing, and all of that is yes. And that is the beautiful pacing process that we will all get to. So if you heard a word tonight that's new to you, write it down. Dream on it. Think about it. How does that resonate in your body, even if you don't know yet what our terminology or our definitions are for it yet, that we'll bring it and we will bring it in. And so I really invite, especially on a first session, to notice what comes up for you as a student. We talked about that in the orientation session, but how do you maximize your learning? And part of maximizing your learning is even noticing what comes up in the material. Oh, what comes up when I don't know a word? What comes up when I don't know an idea yet? Even though the promise will be that we will unpack it over the next 60 hours, because that might interrupt some of the opportunity for you to deepen and embody in the material. And sometimes things are given, like definitions might be given later on purpose so that you can have the experience first and then see what your own words and sensations are to it. And then a definition is brought in. So I just want to encourage you in that relationship with knowing and becoming aware of what comes up as you are in your learning process. Knowing that you are amazing, you will get this. You will get as much as you desire in this. You will embody it. I have no doubt. I have seen all of these teachers and their wisdom pace out curriculum in a way that makes it actually deeper and more relevant in how you will work with people. I promise you that. With that, we're going to land our intro session knowing there's just so much more to come together. And we have some prompts for you. If those who wish to stay in the breakout rooms, Ayami will lead that process. And us faculty will say goodnight in just a moment. But Ayami will give you those prompts for those who wish to stay. We really encourage you to stay if you can. And the resources that we put in the chat will be in a resource document on the learning platform. So the slides will be on the learning platform as well. Sometimes we will, if we put the slides before, we might make adjustments to the last minute. So just know that that might change a little bit, but we will get them for you. And with that, my loves, thank you for your beautiful presence and attention and curiosity and excitement and nervousness and anticipations. And thank you for being the beautiful folks that you are and eager to bring this into yourselves in an embodied way and into the world. Ariel, Craig, Carrie, if there's anything you'd like to add, thank you for your
You see,
beautiful presence.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll also just say that I'll look forward to being with you on Saturday, and we'll have more spaciousness to go into some of the rich questions. We've been tracking them, and we'll have more time. So come and
Lots more time, all the time.
On Wednesday.
And just see Wednesday. Yami will invite you up to lead us in the breakout room prompts and process. Thank you all.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Dr. Ariel. And thank you, Craig. We'll see you guys later.